So I'm still going to do my Coach Speak series, but I wanted to do something a little bit more gauged towards the coaching world. So a lot of the following that I have on TikTok and the one that's growing on YouTube are heavily high school athletes that want to learn about the recruiting process. And I'm all for that. I'm going to continue to pump material on TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube for that audience. But another audience that I would love to continue to interact with are current coaches, either high school coaches, junior college coaches, college coaches at honestly any level that I want to share my stories with and eventually start hearing stories from y'all. I really have considered different names of this series, but I really couldn't land on something. I might change it as I go. But as of right now, I'm just going to go with what I know as a coach. So let's get into episode 1, what I know as a coach. In the first place, I think you have to start as a college coach is networking. And I'm going to tell, I guess, my story and hit some key points of how I networked into my position at an arguably young age with little to no Division I experience, and got gifted a spot on a college conference championship winning program. So let's get into it. I played small Division III basketball at the University of Texas at Tyler before I moved up to Kansas for my final 2 seasons at McPherson College, a really small NAI program about an hour north of Wichita. I always knew I wanted to be a college basketball coach. It's honestly why I got into playing college basketball. I knew that was to me, you had to play college basketball to get in. I've realized once I've gotten in that you can be a manager, that you can start at the high school. There's a lot of different ventures and ways that you can get into college coaching. But at the time when I was growing up, I saw that to be a college coach, you have to play college basketball, you have to be a GA, and that was the route that everyone took. Obviously, that's not accurate. That's the way that I saw it. So I chose to work hard and play college basketball at the highest level that I was capable of playing, which is Division III and NAI level, and work towards gaining connections to get a graduate assistant job. I chose the women's side. There's probably a lengthier story added on to why I chose the women's side. I can talk about that in the next episode. But I chose the women's side during my senior year of college. And very fortunately, the NJCAA, the JUCO National Tournament, was hosted at the time in Salina, Kansas. It's now since moved to Lubbock, Texas, very convenient for me. But at the time, it was in Salina, Kansas. And over my spring break, a bunch of my friends went home. Some went to South Padre. Others, did traditional spring break things that college students would do. And I stayed on campus, one of very few students that stayed on campus that week. And instead of going home or doing any of those things, I drove 15 minutes north of McPherson, Kansas, up to Salina every day from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., the start to finish of every JUCO Nationals game for the women's teams, and watched every game. Here's where the networking story comes in. So obviously at the time, this is late March, early April timing, and I obviously had anything lined up for a GA spot, but I was done with my season and my career was over. So now it's time to buckle up and figure out where I'm going to go to grad school. I had applied to a bunch of graduate schools just to know that I was going to get in somewhere. In worst case, I was going to get accepted somewhere, and I was going to beg a coaching staff to let me be a volunteer. I was going to figure it out one way or another how to make my way onto a Division I staff. So I literally I applied to 10 schools, got into 6 or 7 of them. My grades were okay. I applied to ones that I knew I could get into that had decent women's basketball programs. But I go to these JUCO national games, no job, nothing lined up for me. And I never had the agenda of getting a job at JUCO nationals. Never one time had an agenda of getting a job. My thought process was I had to build some type of rapport with as many college coaches as I could to gain some type of trust, to ask questions, to have them be part of my network, right? That's what you learn, the basic college classes that you take about networking. And so I go the first day, and naive me, I sit there and look around, and there's small pockets of fans that are sitting behind benches during these games, and there's probably 300 or so college coaches. That might be an exaggeration, but it seemed like if you weren't a fan of those teams, you were a college coach. There's not just a general population going to random JUCO games in Salina, Kansas. And so if you weren't a fan of one of those teams, you were a college basketball coach. And obviously, I think it was late March. And so if you were still playing, you weren't there. So if you were really good, you weren't there. But if you were average, you got a down year or whatever, like you're probably in attendance to some perspective as a Division I coach. So I looked around, and again, go back to naive me. I only chose to talk to people that I felt like were doing their jobs. So people that were sitting by themselves, taking notes, watching games. Like I sat there and people watched more than I actually watched the games. And I took notes on players just because, but I literally sat and like tried to figure out who was sitting by themselves, taking notes, watching games. And between games, there was probably 30, 45-minute breaks between games. I would go find a coach to sit next to, and I would ask them questions. And again, I was never asking for a job, not telling them about myself. I literally would walk up and ask 2 questions. I would sit down and be like, hey, first off, like, can I sit next to you for a second, ask some questions? Everyone would say yes. And I just straight up asked. I was like, all right, basically said like, hey, this is who I am. I'm finishing my college career. I'm looking to get into women's college basketball. How did you get in? And like what was your path? And so I literally asked them, as many college coaches as I could, like their story of how they get in, just to see if I could gain some type of knowledge of like, maybe I could do things differently. Met a bunch of people over 3, 4, 5 days and asked that same question, some phenomenal stories. And as soon as they were finished up answering that question, I would say, second, okay, like I'm looking to get in. Are there any words of wisdom on top of your story that you would give? And some like words of wisdom about coaching, some words of wisdom about, actually getting into coaching, like as a profession, whatever. And then everyone gave me different types of words of wisdom, pieces of advice, etc. And I literally gave him a business card. It literally said student athlete on it, first in college. Eric DeRue, a hand business card, and said, hey, thanks for talking. Very nice to meet you. If you know of any openings for a GA spot, I'm open. That was it. Never asked for a GA job, never forced anything on them outside of my business card. After a conversation, and I said, hey, like, enjoy watching the games. Best of luck. I did that for the entire week. And I probably talked to 60 people. I probably could have talked to more, but I didn't want to interrupt games to push my agenda of meeting people and like getting to interact with coaches. So I literally had to choose between half times, between games, like short increments of time that I could choose one person to talk to. Very fortunately, I turned around during at the end of one game, and there was a coach wearing a logo that I'd never seen before. And I pride myself on knowing a lot of logos and names and universities, and I'd never seen this logo before. And I said, hey, coach, if you have a few minutes, I would love to ask you some questions. And she's like, yeah, absolutely. And I went up 2 rows and asked her some questions, the same 2 questions that I asked. And it ended up being Jamie White, who at the time was the head coach of Northern Colorado, the school that I'd never seen the logo before of. And she had transitioned them from Division II to Division I in the Big Sky. And we had a great conversation between games. And at the end of the conversation, she basically said, Eric, like on my drive from Colorado to Kansas, my AD called and told me for the first time ever I can hire a graduate assistant. And that's obviously when you're transitioning from a D2 to Division I, like adding bodies is something that like you hope for at some point. But she told me, she's like, my AD called and said, we got to prove that you can add a GA. And she was like, send me your resume tonight. And so cool. Like I sent her my resume that evening, like shirted up, sent a resume. She's like, I'll talk to you tomorrow. It's cool. It's like she texted me during like the second game or so and walked over and we talked some more just about basketball. Like it was chill. We watched basketball. I was still like moving around because I wasn't going to be set. Like this was going to be my job. So I was still talking to other people. We talked for a little while and she went on her way. The next day she found me again, day 3. We talked some more and she's like, Eric, she's like, I'm going to stay for day 4, which was the semifinal games. And she was like, that's gonna be my last day that I'm leaving. If you want to grab a bite to eat before that first game, I would love to grab lunch with you. So we went and grabbed lunch at this Applebee's in Salina. And I swear to you, we were there for almost 2 hours. I barely ate anything because we talked so much. And I didn't even realize that that was an interview. I thought we were literally just shooting the bull with this college head coach, little like naive self, from a small NAI school, realized it was an interview, and I guess I did well. And she was like, I'm going to stay in contact with you about our GA job. Cool. We went and watched the games. She moved on, said, see you later. And that was that. At the end of that event, I did my best. I emailed everyone that I could that I met, said, thank you for your time, this, that, or the other, just like anybody else would in the basic networking stuff. And I stayed as consistent as I could with Coach Jamie White, of saying, hey, I would love to get out there, this, that, or the other. And like, what you don't really know, sitting in Kansas and she's doing her job in Northern Colorado is like, yes, she got approved to get the job to a GA for the first time. But like, there's still logistical things of opening it, figuring out how much money she was going to offer, like what the actual logistics of the job was going to be. So like she was kind of pushing it off, knowing she was going to hire me, I guess. And I just was, antsy to like get there. She finally emailed and said, hey, like you need to apply to school here. And once you get in, or we'll help you get in, then we'll talk more logistics. So I applied, I got in, which was awesome. And I drove out to Northern Colorado still during my senior year of college, still about a couple months left. And my college career as a student. And I drove out there. Everything was great. Met the staff, amazing. And like I had the GA job. It was done deal. She was like, go find a place to live. And that's where the funny part of the story comes in. I drive back home. So instead of driving back to Kansas, I drove back to Texas for a long weekend. And the first thing I do is Google search, University of Northern Colorado housing. But as everyone knows, the story is, when you go on Google, the first thing that pops up are the articles instead of like actually what you want, some articles about whatever you search. The first article said University of Northern Colorado women's basketball coach resigns. Legitimately, the first time I found out she resigned was the day after I was on campus, given the GA job in Northern Colorado. And resign ended up being a good thing for her, is she accepted the head coaching job at Fresno State. So I hit her a quick text and said, hey, congratulations, the job at Fresno State. Wish you the best of luck. She texted about an hour later. She said, Eric, she's like, apologize. I didn't know at the time that I was getting the job. I had interviewed, but like I didn't know it was mine. So I was operating as if I was the head coach in Northern Colorado. And I completely understood where she was at. And I was like, cool, no big deal. I got to go find my own job. And so I kept doing my thing. 2 or 3, 4 weeks went by. And like, obviously she had her own job. I didn't even think about Fresno State after that, to be honest. Like I thought it was off the radar for myself. And so I was reaching out to anybody and applying everything I could. And out of nowhere, I get a text from Coach White and said, hey, call me. And so I called her, and out of nowhere, she was like, hey, do you want to move to California and be my GA here? And she had a spot open up, very fortunately for me. And I basically was like, done deal. When do I need to be there? I'll come sight unseen. I'll do it. Like Fresno State at the time, and still to this day, is a pretty dominant, was WAC, now Mountain West program on the West Coast. And so I knew it was something that I definitely wanted to be a part of, and a part of Coach White's staff at the time. And I accepted basically on the phone. She's like, cool, apply, get in. And we'll start pretty much mid-June. And I'll tell more of my stories about Fresno State later in this series. But that was my basic, how I got my GA job from being a small NAI player in college, was grinding at the JUCO national tournament and meeting everyone I could, not forcing myself to get a job, but to build rapport by asking about how people, like their story, and then asking about words of wisdom. I would take that to the grave to this day, that was better than asking for a job. Move forward in my networking spiel. So at the end of my first year as a GA, my mind kept thinking, okay, I got 1 year left as my second year as a GA. I'm going to graduate with my master's. And what do I do after this? I need a job. Like, I knew that our Dobo wasn't going to leave. She had just hired him. He was basically retired, so he didn't need to like go find a different job. He didn't need to get promoted. Like he was her junior college coach, when she was a junior college All-American. And so like he had no reason to leave. Our assistants, being 1 year at Fresno State, I don't think in my head, none of them were going to bounce, and she wasn't going to promote me from the GA at Fresno State to a third assistant. It's a big jump. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to have to figure out how to get a job, like get a real paying job more than just a GA. And so At the end of that year one season, I found it my like new agenda was to get to talk to as many college coaches as possible at all levels. Didn't matter what level college coach you were. If you were good or had a reason for me to reach out to you, you got an email. And I say email because it ended up being a bit of a mistake, not a mistake, not the greatest execution of how to get in contact through networking. So if you were good in some stat category through the NCAA, the NAI, the JUCO stat rankings, you got an email from me. And so like top 25 in steals, top 25 in assists to turnover, top 25 in rebounding. I searched all of it on the NCAA website or ESPN website, whatever it was at the time. And if you're top 25, I wrote it down. And if you were top 25 in multiple categories, I wrote them all down. And I would put that in my email as a, hey, you know, I'll say this one because I talked for the time, Sherry Cole at Oklahoma. I'm gonna make up 3 stats. Like they were top 10 in rebounding, top 10 assist turnover, and top 5 in points. But I put like if you were 7th, I put 7th and the exact number, 12th in the exact number of rebounds per game. Whatever the stat was, I was exact on the dot. What rank you were at that stat. And I would say, hey, coach, this is who I am at GA at Fresno State. I'm reaching out to get more information about how you do things in your program. I saw that you were really good at, you know, list the stats that they're top 25 in the country in. And I would love to hear about how you develop your program in these areas. Cool, period, question mark. Next line, I want to stay, I'm finishing my second year as a GA. I want to stay in women's college basketball for my career. I would love to hear your story on how you got into your college program. So bringing that question back from a year later, I thought it was money, and boom, that was my second question. Dropped my new business card that said, you know, Eric, you're a graduate assistant on it, and slotted in the mail. Or I say this, email those out, like straight up, email those out. So take that back. No business card, no mail. Emailed that out, right? And I tell people all the time, like I was getting like 30% response rate back, which is good, not great. Some random solid head coach get back to me. A bunch wouldn't. I was a little bit disappointed, but like every time I got one call back or one email back, I felt like rejuvenated of like, yeah, like this is something that I'm doing right. Even though I wasn't asking for a job, like I was getting on people's radar enough that I was like, man, I need to figure out how to do this more. And what I realized, and hopefully no one's watching is taking this the wrong way, is email, we get influx of emails, so many emails every single day that like it's kind of annoying to some degree, especially people that are in higher ranking positions that get a bunch and have to make decisions every day. The last thing they need to do is read an email from me because they're getting spammed by recruits and people trying to sell them stuff, whatever. So I started doing the same thing, same information, same stat rankings, same questions, and writing it down on, you know, Fresno State letterhead and saying, you know, the same questions. And at the end, I'll be like, if 15 minutes max, like 15 minutes on a drive home, like whenever I can make any time work, put my business card in, send it in the mail. And my goal was to write 3 letters a day. Every morning when I got to the office pretty early, especially as summer kind of came on and school was out, like I was early in the morning to the office, and 3 letters was the first thing that I did. And it was usually Division I coach, Division II coach, and then non-scholarship, like one of each every single day in the mail. That was my literally like goal every single day. And I would write everything that I wrote down, like the stats, like who I wrote it to and the stats that I wrote in a notebook. And I'll keep that notebook in my backpack. So if somebody cold called me, I would literally be able to answer the phone, pull out the notebook and find what questions I asked them. Now, it wasn't like, again, like multiple questions, but it'd be like what stats that I send to them. So I could be like, oh yeah, y'all are really good in steals per game. What do y'all do? What I realized with those 2 questions in particular is you didn't have to have a good season or good year to have great stats. It's like the top 5 team in free throws percentage doesn't mean you won 20 games. There's actually teams that win single digit games that shoot 93% from the free throw line, but it still means your team did something really well. So it means like it gave me a reason to talk to any coach possible, because if I just talked to 20 plus win teams, those people are trying to hire people that are already Division I coaches, like at Division I level or whatever. It's like, to me, I was like, I need to talk to teams that aren't really winning, because they might have assistants leave, they might be let go, etc. And so I needed to talk to a bunch of people. And that was one way that I realized coaches wanted to talk about their program in a positive light, is find the light within the program, even if they had a bad year. The second piece is asking again about how did they get into this profession, in their career, in their story, their journey. Is everyone likes to talk about themselves, right? It's an ego thing. It's a personality thing. People love to tell their story. So I'm asking about your story and your team, the things you did well. Every college coach wants to talk about those two things to some extent. So when I started sending letters instead of emails, it went from 30% response rate to 65 to 70. And I would say when I was sending 3 letters a day, I was getting a call a day, a cold call a day from some pretty high level Division I coaches, big time, like winning NAI coaches of all levels, getting calls almost every day. And I would say like, hey, I just want 15 minutes of your time, like whatever. I had all the time in the world. I know they didn't. And there was coaches that stayed on the phone with me an hour, hour and a half. And I had pages of notes from Big 12 coaches, SEC coaches, D2 NAI coaches, you name it. I talked to a lot of people that summer about this job and the world and profession. And it's funny that none of those coaches offered me a job. But I was okay with that, because I was never asking for a job. It was, to me, it was getting my name out there and just hearing and seeing what there was in this profession. Oddly enough, how I got my Division I assistant coaching job was I wrote a letter to a head coach at the University of Texas at Tyler. So I played my first 2 years at University of Texas Tyler. I'm from Tyler, Texas, lived a mile from campus, played high school ball on the same street as the college. So a lot of connections to UT Tyler. And this coach, Kendra Hassel, took over the program my year 2 as a GA. So it was her first year at UT Tyler. So I wrote her a letter and said, hey, if you ever need anything, my dad will come support all of your games, because he needs something to do Wednesday and Saturday nights. But if you ever need anything, there's not many people from Tyler in the women's college coaching world. I would love to help with whatever you need. You know, we shot some emails back and forth. We had like maybe 1 or 2 phone calls, and we kind of built a professional relationship over that year. And I had never met her in person. At that time, like Zoom wasn't popular, FaceTime wasn't here yet, so I never really seen her in person. But the funny thing is, she took the UT Tyler head job after being the associate head coach at HCU. So come into Final Four, we go to the Final Four. My first ever Final Four, I'm tagging along with Keith Ferguson, one of our assistants at Fresno State. He's introduced me as many people as possible. We show up at a bar, and randomly Kendra Hassel walks by. I stopped, introduced myself. We ended up talking about 15 minutes, just whatever, just talking. And at the end of the conversation, she said, Eric, if you ever need any help, like anything, just text me or call me. Cool. Like, you know, everyone always says that, and you never really think anything of it. And she went on her way, no big deal. 6, 7, 8 weeks later, the Abilene Christian assistant job opens up. And the only reason I knew, because the job was never posted, is that I had seen that their assistant left for Northern Kentucky. The second I saw that, I was like, I'm late, because once it's put on somebody else's website that they've accepted and they're at that job, you know the ACU job has been open for 2, 3, 4 weeks, especially how slow things were moving at that point. And social media wasn't always up and running at that at conveniences. And so I called her. It was like 6 a.m. Fresno time, so probably 8 a.m. in Texas. And I said, Kendra, I was like, what do you know about this job? And basically, like she had said, like they had done interviews, but it wasn't a done deal. I think I can get you an interview. Just send your resume today. And so I sent my resume to Coach Really Good Enough. And about probably 24 hours later, Coach Good Enough emailed me back, pretty much saying that she got my information, that she was going to look over it. About a week later, I get a call from Coach Good Enough. And literally basically was like, I want you to come out for, you know, an in-person interview, which is awesome. Like a 30-minute phone call, you know, turned into an in-person interview. It's crazy because I was sitting in, you know, San Luis Obispo, California, about to drive to LA. and get on a cruise ship to Mexico. And so she was like, hey, can you come to, literally said, can you come tomorrow? And I was like, no, I'm going to Mexico. But if I need to change that, I will get on a flight to Abilene. And she's like, no, like spend your time in Mexico. And then like when you get back, like I'll fly you out. And so literally like we drove down to the coast, LA, shipped out from Mexico, 3-day trip with my wife and all of her friends, or my fiance at the time. We got back, literally like they went home. I drove to the airport at LAX and got on a flight in LAX to Abilene. And the next morning, like I was there for less than 24 hours, got offered the job, accepted the job on the spot, and flew home back to Fresno. And that was my basis of getting my Division I assistant job at Abilene Christian, was that. And obviously extended stories on both situations, but a lot of networking cues between getting a GA job and getting my first assistant job at the Division I level was a lot of people always think that you have to have Division I connections to get you a Division I job. I sent a letter to a Division III head coach, sent a letter congratulating her on the job and saying, if you ever need help, feel free to call or reach out to me, a Division III head coach. And I actually needed help from her and easily called her, and she got me a Division I assistant job. What ended up being is Kendra Hassel, who's now the head coach at Hardin-Simmons University in Abilene, had played for Coach Julie Goodenough at Hardin-Simmons, was a Division III All-American, was the Division III National Player of the Year at one point for Coach Goodenough at Hardin-Simmons. When Coach Goodenough went to Oklahoma State as the head coach, Kendra was a support staff with her. From there, Coach Goodenough went to Charleston Southern. Kendra was an assistant there. And when Coach Goodenough went to Abilene Christian, she was the associate head coach for her there. So Kendra Hassel had been a part of Coach Goodenough's staff everywhere she's been at. So when she told Coach Goodenough that basically she needed to interview and hire me, it was almost a done deal, and I didn't even realize it. They're obviously, like, Coach Goodenough used to coach Kendra Hassel, but what they turned out is they two great friends now. And when your friend says to hire somebody, they usually do it. But again, like everyone thinks you need Division I connections to get a Division I head job. But in reality, you need as many connections as possible because you never know who's going to make the link between one person to another to help you get a job. So today, my talk with what I know about coaching is on networking. And thanks for watching.